Hey, welcome everybody. We're glad you're here today. I always, um, kind of keep it on the one of my highest compliments I can give to somebody is anybody that's willing to give up 4 years of your life to in service of the children of Carmel Clay Schools and East School Board across the state. I call it a higher calling to be a school board member, and I always say the same thing about teachers and anybody in the world of education because we're not manufacturing things. We're in the people business, and these are human beings, and it's a great responsibility. But it's also just a great joy to be able to be in the biz. So appreciate you for that. And if any of you didn't know it was a 4-year gig, and you're kind of going, "Whoa," sorry to bring that stark reality to you, but that's one of the reasons for today's program is to give folks that I mean, there's probably people in here that aren't want to be candidates are going to sign up today. Today's first day you can sign up to be a candidate for a school board, and you have 1 month, and then the deadline will pass. There might be people here that's like, I've been thinking about it. I'd like to know more about that. There's just always a variety that comes to this. We started this a couple of years ago just to make sure that folks knew what they were getting into and kind of understood the job and the responsibilities and that sort of thing. So to do that, I've got experts around me. So this is Kristen Coquet. She's our current board president at Carmel Clay Schools. So Kristen's going to share some things from the board perspective. On my left here, I have Steve Horton, who's the Indiana School Boards Association Director of Board Services. So that's a professional organization that works specifically with school boards and school board members, and they do a lot of professional development and things like that. And then we have our general counsel, which is Andrew Manna. He's an attorney for Church, Hill, and Antrim, and he's been Church has been our general counsel for years and years and years. I don't have a number for that, but it's been a good while. And he's going to be our guy that shows some of the legal responsibilities and that sort of thing of being a school board member. So given all that, Kristen is our opener, and I'll hand over to Kristen. And once again, thank you for being here.
I am kind of opening after Dr. Beresford and giving you kind of the basics of what the board is as well as our school. So as you can see, this is part of our mission of Carmel Clay Schools. And I won't read every slide, I promise everything, but I am gonna read these because these are in front of us at every board meeting, and this is something that we try to remember and we talk about all the time as board members because this is what the students are the center of every decision we make. So our mission is Carmel Clay Schools will provide opportunities for all students to realize their potential in an ever-changing world. And then the vision statement is together we achieve. You've probably seen that a lot on the media things and things sent out. So part of the guiding principles of our board, and I guess before I even say this, the board is a board as a whole. So the board is never one individual member. There are 5 of us. The other school districts might have different amounts of school board members. We have 5, and we act as the board, not an individual member of the board. Students, as I said before, are the center of every single decision we make. So when we know we have a meeting coming up and we have our agenda that's sent to us, we look at that through the lens of students. So are we approving monies to finish out a school renovation? That's for the students so that they have a better environment to learn. Again, I'm not going to read all of these because you can read them, but all of these are the things that we keep in mind and we review, especially at some of our executive meetings, because these are part of any decision we make. A couple of the ones below I do want to read is open and transparent communication. That comes sort of as the no surprises type thing we say on the board. So before a meeting, if a board member has any questions about anything on the agenda or any deliberative material, we need to at least ask those questions and get answers. We can't deliberate via email because of open door laws, and you'll learn more about that. But we want to make sure there's no surprises brought up in board meetings because it gives time for the administration to prepare answers instead of saying, well, I don't know the answer to that, or I'm not sure, let me check. At least we have the answer so the public can get those. The time commitment. As Dr. Beresford said, the term is 4 years. And in addition to that time commitment, usually we have 2 meetings a month. So we have a regular session and a workshop session. In addition to those meetings, we also may have special sessions. We had one last month, I believe, to do an approval, an early morning one to approve something that monies that needed approved in order to start a project. We also have executive sessions, and we have those sometimes as executive session retreats so that we can build the board as a team or to discuss personnel or other matters. There are some months where we only have one board meeting a month, and because they're busy, like May, we only have one board meeting because of the holiday and graduation, and it's just kind of a crazy month for everybody. Sort of the rest of this is, at least in my opinion, what you make of it. So attending school events, going to other conferences and things are things I've tried to do. I try to go to as many events as I can, especially the other things like the Carmel Education Foundation Grant Awards and sporting events, the Teacher of the Year dinner. All of those things are things, they're not mandatory to attend, but I think it really shows that we are an active board that wants to learn more about the school and appreciates the teachers and students. We are on call for emergency situations, and so the superintendent keeps us in line with what might be going on and keeps us either through texts or emails, what might be going on during the day, keeps us updated. With conferences, that one mostly means, I would assume means the ISBA conference. So Indiana has a school board association, and so they have really great conferences. I don't know if you might learn more about that from Steve, but I've tried to go to as many things as I can. It really helps you learn. They have a new board member academy after elections. So ours was it January? And it was a whole day event. It was really good, really. And then they had thereafter, every month they had virtual meetings where we learned about open door law and pretty much all we needed to know to be a board member. They also have in-person conferences downtown, and then there's the National School Board Association. Next year it's in Atlanta. This year it was in New Orleans. Louise from our board went to that this year. So that's probably the conferences. There is a compensation for school board members. Does anybody want to know what it is? Do you? It's $2,000 for the year. In addition to the meetings that you have as the board, there is some other time that you would have to commit for things that you are appointed to. So last year I was on the Carmel Clay Parks and Recreation Board. That was a really fun one. You are a voting member of the board, and so you get to learn about the parks that are being created and things that are going on. I really loved that one. Another one is the Carmel Redevelopment Commission. Our board member Greg is on that right now, and that one keeps the school, it's kind of that go-between between the school and the board and the Carmel community, what's being redeveloped. So what are they building, what housing developments are going in, and that's nice to just know so we can prepare some of that information on how many students will we have or might we have. Will there be growth or a decrease? There is also a newer one with the Carmel Education Foundation. And then a legislative liaison is sort of the board member that keeps track of what's going on when our legislature is in session. So potential bills or laws that are coming up, what's the changes that they're making in them, and then when they become final, keeping us up to date on that. Policy liaison is one of the main duties of our board is to take Indiana law and policies and make that policies for our district. And so that is that person's job. There's also a cable TV. I really don't know what that one does, but that's usually an administrator. And then we do an appointment to the library board. I'm not going to read all of these, but these are, you can kind of see the communication expectations. This goes along, like I said before, with the no surprises. We are, as I said before, a whole board. So I'm not Kristen, board member. We are the whole board, and that's how we act. So if members of the community come to us, as they frequently do, and as they should, because we are representing the community with concerns or hoorays or whatever else, we have to then direct them to the rest of the board or whoever else in administration needs that information. We are not to act on that as individual board members. We receive weekly communications from Dr. Beresford. He sends us weekly updates on Fridays, the Friday update, and it's just kind of from each of the administrators what they have done that week, what they are working on, maybe any issues there were. And then what I alluded to before was receiving the agenda. So typically we have meetings on Mondays, sometimes Tuesdays. The Wednesday before that, we receive the agenda for that next meeting. One of your expectations is that you review that entire agenda, including all of the attachments. And there's a lot of them sometimes for things we have to approve for payroll or other things that we're having to pay out. But the expectation is that we open and read every single one of those so we know what's going on. That's our fiduciary duty as the board. And when we receive those, we are to ask questions as soon as we can when we receive those so that administration can respond to those in a timely manner before the meeting. A lot of times what we all try to do is still ask the same question in the meeting, but then the administrator has had time and we have already had the response, but to reiterate that so the public can see. Let's see what else. I don't want to read all of these. The number 6 and 7 go together, obviously. So treating each other with respect. Again, that goes back to that we are a board, and the board is what votes, not individual people all on their own. And again, that goes along with no surprises. No surprises in the meeting so that we, not that we're not being transparent, but so that the administration can prepare a response, and so we can prepare a response and know how to tell everyone in the meeting what's going on. So these are kind of things that the superintendent expects. This was a bit of a shift for me because I have 3 kids in the schools and I do volunteer. And so I let Dr. Beresford know if I have standing. For instance, I was last year volunteering in the middle school library every week, just shelving books. And you should try it. It's kind of fun. But I let him know that every Tuesday from 9 to 10:30, I'm doing that, so that he knew when I would be in the schools or anytime I go on field trips with my first grader, just so he knows, so the principals know. I also usually try to email the principals and let them know that I will be there as a mom in their school building, so they are not surprised. Let me see what else. So number 3 is a big thing. And this goes along with what I've said multiple times, that we operate as a board as a whole. And so when we vote, if it's 3-2 or 4-1 or 5-0, that decision is what's carried forward so that the superintendent and the assistant superintendents know where to go from there. Some of this I've already gone over about reading all the documentation. I think, and have any of you been on a board before? Okay, awesome. Any board, really, you should be reading the agenda and reading everything ahead of time so that you're a prepared member. That's part of this experience, is that you're being an active participant, not just kind of sitting on the sidelines. All right. I'm going to turn it over to Steve.
And I'll just tag on a couple of things from the board's perspective. So when we talk about the communication that goes on, is the administration's job is to make sure that the board members have all the information they need to make a decision. So that whole idea of, if you got questions, we need you to ask them so we can get you the answers to them so you can make a good decision. So it's not it's the whole part of it is about sharing, because what you saw in all that is we're a team. And so administration and board members have to work together as a team in order to best serve our students and our families. I will tell you personally that I didn't have anything to do with the guiding principles or the board expectations, the communications guidelines. I didn't have any of that. Anything to do with all that. But when I was approached about applying for the job as superintendent at Carmel Clay Schools, and I read those on the website, I thought, wow, if that board really does follow these guiding principles and really does use those communication guidelines, I want to work there. And that's been a long-standing tradition with the board here. They take those guiding principles seriously on how they base their decisions, and also those communication guidelines always keeps us in the in a good, positive, healthy communication pattern, so that there's no big surprises, but also that we can communicate effectively and efficiently. One thing that I wanted to highlight out of that is that when what one person on the board hears, everybody on the board hears. So in other words, if there's an email to the board member, that board member shares that email with everybody on the board. And that way, everybody has the same information at the same time, and that way they can act as a really good communicative team. So that's a really important part. So I'm the luckiest superintendent on the planet because I get to work with the boards that have these high principles and great guidelines to keep us going. So with that, we're going to hand it over to Steve Horton, and he is the board member's guy.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Dr. Beresford and Kristen, for inviting me to be a part of this. I'm thrilled to be here. As an association, ISBA really concerns ourselves with supporting public education in general, but specifically my work is with school boards and with superintendents, what we always refer to as the leadership team for the school corporations. So I get to work with school board members and superintendents all over the state. I've had people make comment to me, how do you do what you do? And my answer is I get to work with great people. I really do. I get to work with highly committed, highly devoted people who care deeply about their communities, about the children who are coming through the doors of their schools every day. You know, all of that makes such a difference. And so being able to do what I do has really been a blessing to me. I will share with you that I came to this work through years ago being elected to my own school board. I was in Ohio, born and raised in Ohio before coming here to Indiana. So go Buckeyes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that out loud. But it's work that I found when I got elected to my local school board that really got under my skin, meaning it became really what I was about at that point. And I wasn't expecting that when I ran for the board. I was one of those people, and I should have known better, actually, because I grew up with a superintendent. My father was a superintendent in Ohio for 22 years. My mother was a public school teacher for over 30 years. I started out as a public school teacher before going on to other things. And so the whole public school world was kind of in my blood, as it were. It was certainly a big part of our family. And I was one of those people, though, that when I got elected or decided to run for the board, like many of you, I had people in the community who were encouraging me to run. You would make a great board member. Well, that sounds flattering. I like that. Somebody saw something in me. But what I didn't realize was the level of commitment and work that really goes into being an effective board member. And you'll hear me talk about effective board work and effective board members. You know, in my work, I hear the term good and bad all the time. That person's a terrible or bad board member. That person's a really good board member. I don't know what that means. It's pretty subjective. But I do understand what being effective is. And so that's where I always approach this discussion. And so at the time, I was one of those people who thought, how hard could this be? They have one meeting a month. I've been to those meetings. Sometimes they last 20 minutes. You know, I know you crinkle your eyebrows. They had this problem of had 20-minute meetings. But that's a whole nother discussion. But what I didn't realize was the level of commitment and work that really goes into it. And so that's why I'm glad that you're here and we have the opportunity to at least share with you some of the important things to consider about board work. I've got up here on the screen the 6 areas the board work or the board governs. Right up there in the top left, as you're looking at it, that setting mission, vision, and goals, I often hold or usually hold as, you know, this is really the primary function of the board, to work with the superintendent and the people in the community and the people in the schools to really establish what is the vision for what we want to be. What are our goals for where we want to go, and the board needs to own that. The most effective boards, it's their strategic plan. It's their work that's being carried out in the schools, and they hold that as this is us. It's not somebody else's plan. Overseeing the finances is an important part of it. You'll hear me say later on that board members need to be capacity builders in the work that they do, in that you need to ensure that there is proper finance and facilities and capabilities, resources for the students. Engaging the community is such an important part of the work. You know, one of the things that led me to want to run for my local school board was I saw the schools and I saw the community, and there really wasn't a meeting between the two. And I felt like there was a school board in place that wanted to say, you know what, just stay out there. We'll do our work. We don't really want you to intrude or be a part of it. And the truth is, you need the community. The community needs the schools. There is an important connection there that needs to happen. Policy is an important part of board work. We're going to talk more about policies later, but overseeing that policy manual is a crucial part of the work. Hiring and evaluating the superintendent. I've said that since coming to Indiana, I've had more meetings with school boards and just discussions in general about evaluation of the superintendent, because it's hard work for 5 or 7 people. You've got your lives coming together and be able to effectively evaluate the superintendent, but that's such an important part of the role of being a superintendent. And I love the fact that I have found in my work spending a lot of time with boards, helping them through the evaluation process, because that means that they're taking that part of it seriously. And then just really knowing the district performance. I say that the best work boards do is to really have an eye on outcomes. Are we doing what we set out to do? Are we being successful? If we're not, what do we need to do to be successful? And always having that oversight eye on that. So those are the 6 main areas. If you're not working as a board in one of those 6 areas, you're probably outside of the scope of what board governance really is. So let's talk a little bit more about that. There is an important rule about that word boardmanship. This is one of the things that allows boards to work, because I've often said, if you consider in a community, as a community member, you can decide to file your petition and get on the ballot to be a board member. And if you get enough votes, then you end up sitting at the table with the rest of the board members. But how does that really work in the day-to-day work that boards do with their superintendent? And the answer is that second statement. It's the understanding that as a board member, I am an important part of the board. I am a crucial voice. In fact, you could argue one of the most influential voices in the community. And the work of the board is as influential as anything you can do in your community. But I don't have any individual authority. I can't make decisions on my own. Every decision is made as a whole, as the entire board. So that one norm really kind of precedes everything as you go into board work. I love this quote because really it gets to the heart of what effective boards do, and that is they forge an important relationship with the superintendent. So it's not board and superintendent, it's board and superintendent working corporately and making decisions together and moving forward to do the best possible work for the corporation. And so with that, Kristen alluded to the communication part of it. There's so much communication that happens, and it's so important that line of communication stays open between superintendent, among all of the board members, and that the work you do allows you to constantly have that line of communication and openness, and that the entire board is part of the decision-making process. To Dr. Beresford's comment that what one board member knows, all board members need to know. That there's no harboring of information. It's an open communication for everybody. And then this graphic really talks about, what is the importance of an effective board for your community. This is the old adage, perception is reality. And perception is reality. What the community sees is what the community knows about the work that's happening in the schools, and the board has a big part of that with their superintendent. So the ability of the board to be able to have that look, that overall governance look, to be the board of directors for a multi-million-dollar corporation, and to work closely with the superintendent to develop trust and respect is crucial. Because I can tell you, I've worked in a number of communities, not just in Indiana, but around Ohio, that don't understand this part of it. And so when the community sees a dysfunctional team trying to lead the schools, what do they think about the school district in general? It goes to the school district as well. So this part of it is so important to understand the two roles. You know, what are those roles? Well, there are lanes. On the left is the governance lane. Yes, board oversees the policies. Every policy in that policy manual is there because the board ultimately approved it. The board, as I already said, has to maintain the vision and goals and has to be the oversight and the evaluator, not just of the superintendent's work, but what's happening within the school corporation as a whole. The board meetings, who brings those recommendations to the board? It's a superintendent. But there's constant communication about those recommendations and what the board is actually voting on. And your job in representing the entire community, once you're on the board, is so important. That's kind of a mental attitude. I live here and I know these people, but I need to represent the entire community. I need to be here for every student in these schools. And when I talk about advocacy, not just advocacy at the state level, because every year when the General Assembly comes together, they look at and consider a lot of bills that are going to affect the work that happens in public schools. This short session saw 32 new, isn't that right, 32 new bills passed that now the administration and the board have to take forward and say, okay, this is what has been passed in the legislature. Here's how we need to move forward. This is constant work. So as an association, we're always sending out things to our membership saying, hey, Assembly's considering this, call to action, because the advocacy part of it makes a difference. And we hear that from legislators. In fact, one of the things we regularly hear from legislators is, well, we don't feel like this is an issue that's as important as we thought it might be for the communities and the schools, because we're really not hearing that much from the schools. When the reality is, we need you. Get in there. Be an advocate. And the other part of it, too, is if the school board doesn't advocate for the work that's happening in these schools in Carmel, who will? And it doesn't take much to cause people to lose trust or real respect for what's the work that's happening in the schools. So the board is so important in that part. And then the last part of it is just working for consensus. So I say consensus is, as an individual board member, I learned early on that I'm not going to get 100% of what I want out of a decision. But as long as my voice is there and my voice is part of it, and we are making decisions together, that's what allows us as a board to really support the work that's happening and to be that strong advocate for the work. And then the other side, so this is the oversight. This is the big picture, the how, the what, the how much. And then the administration on the other side, starting with the superintendent, have to do things like create administrative guidelines for policies. That strategic plan that's so important, those goals that are a common goal for everybody involved, get implemented at the administration level. The administration is the one who's making the staffing and evaluation decisions within the schools. They're acting on the approvals. All of those things are happening on the administrative side with constant communication with the board as a whole. So when that happens well, things work very well in the corporation, and it's so important for the community. What do I mean by iceberg principle? This is my open mind statement. I bet you learned something in elementary school, right, about icebergs. What do we know about icebergs? That's right. Most of it's underwater where you don't see it. Well, the reason why I bring that up here and the reason why I say having an open mind is important, there is a great deal of regulation around public education. So many of the decisions that have to be made involve being very, very cognizant of what is in statute and what we can and can't do within those constrictions. So that iceberg principle is something that's important to remember. And I would hope as you consider running for board and becoming a member of this leadership team, that you'll consider that there probably are decisions out there you thought, why did they make that decision? I don't think I like that decision. And you, I'm sure, have very clear ideas about that and the why, but also keep in mind that there's a lot of work behind the scenes. Board members will spend a lot of time looking at information, data, seeking to understand the behind-the-scenes information that goes into making big decisions for the corporation before that decision is made. So the most effective boards will do that as an ongoing work and constantly working at data. One of the things that I remember is after I became a board member, or as a friend of the family said, I lost my mind. But after I lost my mind and became a board member, one of the people I talked to on a regular basis said, well, so how are things going? I said, they're going well. How do you like being a board member? I said, I like it. I'm enjoying the work. So what has changed for you? And I thought about that for a minute, and I said, you know, probably the biggest thing is I'm doing more reading now than I've ever done in my life. Just remember, or keep that in mind, if you become a board member, you're going to be doing a lot of reading and asking a lot of questions about what does this mean? What is this data telling us? What do we need to be considering here? And that is where that communication part with the superintendent is so crucial to success. So coming into it as a new board member, remember the iceberg principle. All of those things that are looked at and talked about in terms of data and information, you need to be open to when you become a board member, because you're going to see the rest of the iceberg. And you may think, oh, that decision, oh, okay, now I understand why you made that decision, because. So just be open to that. And just know that all of this is working to build a strong structure within the corporation, a chain of command that is set and in place, an information, line of information that allows all board members to stay informed, but also allows for good communication among all the people in the schools and out to the community. All of that structure is important. And I said early on that one of the most important things boards do is to be capacity builders. That is so crucial to making sure that you have the resources in place to best serve your students. So some things that are important to do. If you're not already attending board meetings, attend board meetings. Look at the agenda. How is it built? What's the dynamic between the board members, superintendent? How are they communicating and working in that meeting? I always say the board meetings are where the board does its public work. That's where the community sees the board at work. So those meetings are important. 20-minute meetings are not a good idea overall. That second point, one of the most beneficial things for me as a candidate when I was running for the board was scheduling a meeting. And in fact, in Ohio, it was the Ohio School Boards Association that said, hey, you ought to schedule a meeting with your superintendent. I asked my dad, I said, hey, should I? He said, absolutely. So I did. We sat down, they had a projector set up, there was a screen. I said, well, we're having a PowerPoint. And they said, you bet. And they went through more information than I had any idea they would go through in about a 2-hour meeting. I had the opportunity to ask a lot of questions. They shared so much information with me, and I walked out of there going, wow, I'm glad I had that meeting. So schedule time with to be able to sit down and talk with the superintendent. Third one's really important. Remember, if you are elected, you are one vote, you are one member of the board, you do not have individual authority. It's only the board as a whole that has authority. So it's really important when you're out talking to people, listen, talk about what's important to you, listen to what's important from the people who you are talking to, but please don't make promises, because that can be a bad limb to be out on once you get elected. Spend time talking to board members. Learn more about what goes into the work and what the expectations are. Please keep mudslinging out of it. Make your campaign about who you are and about what you bring to the table, not about what you think of somebody else. And remember that this goes back to the promises thing. If I say, well, I'm going to, that could be a dangerous place to be as an individual, because things that you say to people, they will remember. This is going back to the iceberg discussion. Don't jump to conclusions. Allow yourself the opportunity to learn and understand. You always say that first year at least of a board member is a huge learning curve once you get elected. So be open to that. Make sure that your candidacy is based on issues, ideas, concerns, needs, desires, not on other personalities. Run on your own platform. And get an idea of, what's in the budget. How does the budget process work? Those are important things to try and understand. Ask for the policy manual or go out and look it up. There is a link there for all of those documents, but spend time with them before you get elected. And then remember, if you get elected to your local board, you're going to be part of this leadership team. And we want you to be as an effective member as possible when you're elected. So always keep that in mind as you're going through your campaign for the seat. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Manna.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. For you guys in the audience, I want you to know that we will be posting the slideshow on our website and a recording of this program and presentation on our YouTube channel. And those links will also be on the school board on our website under the board. It'll be right there in that section of it. Also, Steve Mitchell reminded me of something. There'll be two other opportunities for people who actually file to be on as a candidate in the school board election, and we'll have a couple opportunities. One of those is with me, where I'll meet with you and answer questions and chat. And then we have a team meeting. So you get all the candidates can, if they so choose, can get a little more information about the district and some of the topics that Steve talked about. Over here at the table on my left is Dr. Dudley, Mr. McMichael, and Dr. Ostrike, the three finest assistant superintendents in the state of Indiana and arguably in the nation. And they will be in that second meeting to share information about the board at that point in time. So at this time, I will hand it over to the legal eagle, Andrew Manna, and
all right, thank you. Kristen and Steve and I were debating our styles. Kristen behind the podium. Steve wanted to be out front. I just now noticed that there's this moving podium that allows me to have both combinations here. So I'm going to bring this out just a minute. Sorry. That's all right. You're fine. All right. So, yes, my name is Andrew Manna. I'm an attorney. I'm a school attorney. 100% of my practice is representing schools. To clarify, my client, our client in the law firm, is the school board. We primarily, on a day-to-day basis, work with administrators, but we represent the school corporation and the school board. I'm a former teacher as well. Steve, I did not know that about your background. And taught social studies. Feel very lucky to practice in this area. As we move into the fall, my professional organization is called the National School Attorneys Association. And I'm lucky enough, I guess, or maybe not lucky, to be taking over as the chair of our national organization in the fall. So we have a lot of national groups Kristen mentioned, and information that really comes to us from the national organizations. So it's a great privilege to be able to serve school boards and that school attorneys organization as well. As an example of what you're going to hear a little bit as I proceed. There is a little bit of duplication and redundancy of some things, but I'm going to maybe bring a little bit different angle and perspective, and maybe emphasize some bullet points that both Kristen and Steve talked to you about. So all arms of government as a school board, as you think about taking a spot on a school board, you have to keep in mind at times you're an executive role, meaning making and helping develop policy, legislative and a judicial role. Your primary responsibility, and I'll go back over those arms of government in just a second, but your primary responsibility is to hire and supervise the superintendent. Steve emphasized examples like making an appointment to meet and talk to the superintendent to understand the process and things that are going on, developing those policies, and following the ISBA Code of Ethics. And as an example, when we're talking about policy, I want you to keep in mind for a second, how many people read articles from this past session, understanding for if you have students or know about students for next year, what's going to happen with cell phones in schools? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so cell phones will have to develop some policies and procedures to deal with cell phones. And so I want you to keep that in the backdrop of your mind when we're talking about develop policies, and I'll show you why. So legislatively, again, breaking these down, that's where you help understand and have read. Steve mentioned looking at the website, understanding the bylaws and policies of Carmel Clay schools. From school district to school district, you have different variances in policy. As an executive, you're employing the superintendent, letting the superintendent administer day-to-day operations. Holding hearings in a judicial capacity, this doesn't come up as often, but we do have things like budget hearings, we have bond hearings, we have sometimes employment hearings. If there's a teacher matter of a teacher discipline or employee discipline. So in that capacity, we have to be neutral. You have to hear information as a neutral. And both from Kristen and Steve talked a little bit about being cautious about receiving information out in the public. As a judicial body, if you ever had to serve and holding a hearing on a discipline matter, you have to hear both sides. So there might be a principal version, there might be a teacher version, but not having information or judgment in advance is the key to that and remaining impartial. In the absence of Indiana code, the school board may adopt local policies and bylaws. We really summarize this. You have heard of home rule. That's really where this comes from. We kind of made this very plain and simple and took away the legal language, but this is what this means. In the absence of Indiana code, let me go back to that cell phone example. Going into next school year, administration working with the board is developing policy and procedure because the Indiana code tells us from the legislature we're not to use cell phones in schools, but only for educational purposes. But it really doesn't define the vocabulary of how to do that or any punishment for that or any discipline for that, or what does a teacher do to define what it means for an educational purposes. So all the absences of not having information in the Indiana code, the school board then works with administration to develop that policy on the use of cell phones. So going into next year, that's just an example where we might be having a policy committee, which you do, and you have some liaisons, a couple school board members.
Yes. Yeah, we do not have we do not have committees.
Thank you. Yes. So you have a liaison talking about what might go into that policy for cell phones. So that's an example that kind of the work that goes in from board members. We'll have some question time at the end as well to clarify anything Kristen and Steve and I have gone over. But in the bylaws then, under the website, and you'll look at the bylaws under 144.2, these are sort of the high-level honor high member responsibility, respect board relationships, and let's talk a little bit about what each of these four mean as examples. So starting with the first one, I think this has been emphasized and highlighted in terms of the goals and the mission and the value of Carmel Clay Schools, thinking always in terms of children first. We have talked a lot this morning about understanding that basic function of the school board developing policy, not administrative. So meaning on a day-to-day basis, if we have a complaint about the lacrosse coach, as an example, I don't think we do, I'm just using that. If we have a complaint about the lacrosse coach, that's for the administration to handle and to filter and to deal with. Any emphasis points? I told Steve and Kristen as we go through, any emphasis point on this one? I can go to the next.
No, I mean, I just, to back up what you said, that we are sort of the overall overarching governance, as this says, not the day-to-day operations of the district. That's so because the board hires and evaluates the superintendent is the sole employee of the board and therefore hires people to fill administrative and other, all the staff positions to carry out. That's not any of, really, it's not our business. That's the administration part that the administration takes care of on a daily basis.
Yeah, I was going to say also in that the important thing to remember is the point of the line of communication for board members is the superintendent. Because we always get that question, well, if we're hearing complaints about a lacrosse coach, what do we do with that? Your superintendent is your point of communication. You take that to the superintendent and let the administration do the work that they need to do.
I think that's a good point. I had said something similar when I was speaking, that if, a community member emails us or reaches out to us, that we need to bring that to the board, but that also includes bringing it to the attention of the superintendent, so the superintendent is aware of what's going on, and then that discussion can begin.
I just want to share that we love our lacrosse coaches. And we may have 2 state championship teams if things go well. So just want to make sure that was clearly communicated. One thing that I think, if I was going to summarize what this conversation is, that when you're on the board, you become the complaint department. People elected you, and if they have a concern or a complaint, they're going to share it with you. And that's something we have to work on as a team. So thank you.
Apologies, lacrosse coaches.
Well, and piggybacking off of what you just said, that is something I think I kind of forgot to highlight. On the board, there is emails from the community and emails. For Carmel Clay Schools, the president responds to those on behalf of the board, not as an individual board member. So the president responds to the email, gets that information to the proper administrator, obviously to Dr. Beresford, and that's kind of how that process works. So that's another piece of that, as the board is email communication from the community.
Thank you. All right. Recognizing, and again, just drilling down a little bit on the ethics and the bylaws, which are some pieces that Steve has covered, but recognizing that the authority rests with the board in official meetings and that no individual member has legal status. There's last few years an Avengers movie that has these 5 jewels that have to go into the, right? And so those 5 jewels come together and then they have their power. You can think of yourself as a transformer. You come together, and having the 5-member, or some schools 7 members, but here 5 members, that come together to have that power, that's where the official decision-making comes, when it's a board meeting and we're coming together to make a vote, and that's the authority. Making all decisions only after all the facts have been presented. Going back to my statement about, especially with a disciplinary matter, administrative responsibilities, administrators, principals, assistant superintendents look into matters of discipline. There is a lot of court decisions that would talk about staying neutral and only hearing the facts presented and then making a decision. And respecting all the opinions of others, and respecting the majority rule of those 5. Any emphasis points before I go forward?
Just to reiterate that last point, that when there is a vote in a board meeting and a decision is made, that is the decision, and then the board as a whole honors that decision.
Thank you. All right, next. My emphasis point here, acting only upon the recommendation of the superintendent in matters of employment or dismissal. I think I've highlighted that a couple of times in the last few minutes, but Especially, again, I'm not just going to stay completely neutral here and say any employee, no specific department or sport. If it's brought up that there's, in the grocery store, that there's a concern about X member of a Carmel Clay School staff, again, that's where we have to, as a board, allow administration, superintendent, et cetera, to look into those matters. And so we remain neutral and can make the decision upon recommendation of administration. Any emphasis point there? Even Dr. B, I didn't mean to exclude you. Any emphasis point there? Good? Okay. My next one, I would highlight insisting all school business transactions be open, ethical, and above board. We've talked about this today thus far, where having that copy of emails, maybe if you have a question as a board member, you're allowing and giving the opportunity for the rest of the board to understand that same question. Often, and I would emphasize that as an attorney as well. I often will say to a board member, how are we going to pass this question on to the rest of the board if I had a question? That tends to funnel primarily through the board president, and that's often what I would ask is that if you have a question as a board member, let's have that go through the board president so he or she can then distribute to the rest of the board. Refusing to discuss personnel matters or confidential business of the board. I can highlight that on this next slide. We have the Family Education Rights Privacy Act, which is a federal law, where student matters are confidential. We then also have personnel matters. Sometimes it could be a health consideration, it could be a personal leave, it could be a disciplinary matter, but yet it is confidential in the respect of that's their personnel file to be handled with administration. There's privileged information, meaning that there's times when maybe there's a safety and security issue, and it's privileged information. So the business of the board in terms of figuring out a student matter, a personnel matter, or a safety security matter is confidential, and there are laws that protect those. Any emphasis point there?
One of the types of meetings we have that are where there is confidential information is our executive sessions that we have. There will be typically an agenda posted for the public to see why we are meeting. The date and the time and the agenda is posted. However, the contents of that meeting are confidential.
That helps me transition. Steve, before I transition to open door law.
I was just going to say that what allows the board and superintendent to work well together and effectively together is developing a strong level of trust. And so that's where that confidentiality is so important. If that's broken, it really erodes trust or makes the possibility of a high level of trust extremely difficult.
Okay. Kristen gave us a preview. What we're going to talk about next in terms of the types of meeting. So the open door law, Indiana law, with respect to how and when boards can meet and what types of meetings then there are, and then third, when you can take official action. So she mentioned, and I think we've alluded to a couple of these throughout the last hour, there are regular monthly meetings. Those are usually a year in advance scheduled and published. There are workshop sessions, maybe a specific topic on a workshop. Special sessions at times are public meetings, and the board can take final action on items and vote at regular public meetings. There are, as Kristen has mentioned, executive sessions, and I'll define for you here in a second some of those specific reasons that are closed meetings for specific reasons and confidential with the board. So just to kind of lay out a side-by-side, to kind of put this into scope, executive sessions are something less than a vote. There certainly can be conversation, might be for a specific person, or specific purpose, like personnel or collective bargaining. And I'll show you all those reasons in just a second. And it's just thoughts for the board to understand their role, to understand the topic, and that's done in an executive session to allow some fact gathering. Whereas on the right side, when we transition to things like regular meetings, workshops, or special sessions, and final action is going to be taken, that's where the vote happens in public. And so there are things then that are maybe on the agenda, and we'll have vote and a result of that vote. A meeting, just to break this down a little further, is a gathering of the majority of the board members for the purpose of taking official action. This is defined under Indiana Code. That official action, though, has to be further broken down to understand that. Receiving information, and again, it's a majority of the board members, receiving information, deliberating, making recommendations, establishing policy, and making decisions, taking final action on those decisions. So that's what a meeting, and then into what actually is official action. And you'll see that when you convene to take that final action. Finally, the specific reasons, and you can see this under Carmel Clay Schools Policy 167.2, are the different reasons when you might have a closed executive session. I've already mentioned a moment of these. Interviewing or receiving information about prospective employees. There are times when we have information concerning alleged misconduct. I've kind of mentioned the disciplinary side of things. Discussion of a job performance evaluation. Discussion of information to respond to threats, school safety, collective bargaining, litigation. All of those are kind of training. Kristen mentioned earlier, they might have a training session to understand their role as school board members, would be another reason. So these variety of different reasons would be the reason to have an executive session. And some use them regularly, some use them as needed. Those are the different specific reasons. And last but not least, I think we've also talked about the board president functions as the official spokesperson. So keeping this in mind when it comes to social media, when it comes to speaking to legislatures or other officials, that the board president speaks on behalf of that 5-member board. So keep in mind my Avengers diamonds coming together, and having the board president be the official spokesperson, and making sure that if you're speaking in your mom capacity or your dad capacity or or individual capacity, that you clarify that that's on your own and not on behalf of the board itself. All right. What's the rule? You keep people sitting for 45 minutes to an hour, and you give them time to ask questions. Is that it?
That's not a rule. It's more of a guideline. But I've asked Dr. Oestreich to be our guy with the mic. He brings the juice. And this is your time to ask questions. And so just raise your hand, and he will deliver the mic to you and get your questions answered. So is there any questions out there? In education, we call this wait time. We have to take appropriate wait time to give everybody a chance.
This question is for Kristen. Is there anything you can think of that you would tell us that you wished you knew when you began this journey as a candidate and an elected official?
There is a big learning curve so this is, I guess, more if elected and then sworn in, giving yourself grace that there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn about the different financial, I guess, pots or buckets of the school system. It's a big learning curve. And so it takes about a year to kind of get to understand. So not only are you learning the ins and outs of the school district, but also if you have not been on a board, I know some of you said you have, understanding to learn and use Robert's rules as well is part of that. And then part of it's a learning curve all around also then to learn to be part of that new team, because you are needing to work as a team, as a board, and getting to know each other.
I'm not sure how I want to phrase this yet. How does this affect like a work-life balance? How much time are you spending doing this?
That is a really good one. There is a difference between being in time commitment on a daily and weekly basis between being a board member and being president. I can say that. Because the president is the spokesperson for the board, there are more commitments and answering emails and that sort of thing. That being said, I'm a mom of 3. I own 2 small businesses, and I'm making it work. Um, so I think that goes along with that, giving yourself grace that you're not going to do everything perfectly. And but as a regular board member, there is a time commitment, and it just takes. I think that's part of that adjustment period that I alluded to previously. That giving yourself grace that maybe you forgot till an hour before the meeting to read the agenda. That's okay. For you'll get in that groove of when you receive things, you'll read it, go through it, ask questions. It just is a learning curve of um, where that time goes. I will say what I do personally is I schedule time in the morning and in the evenings for email time for the board specifically. Because I own a business, I need to be available for my employees during the day and then my kids through bedtime. And so I schedule time is how I've made it work, specifically to work on board things.
Would add that we start onboarding actually now. This is your first session of onboarding actually. And the meetings we have even before the election are other pieces where it's onboarding because you're learning more about the district and that sort of thing. Then once the election happens in November, then November, December, it's a little more intense onboarding at that point in time. And we also utilize resources like the School Boards Association, like Kristen mentioned, where you can go and learn some things. So we kind of start you out with the basics, and I call it like survival mode, what's going to happen and what your duties are going to be and how to use our computer system, for instance. And that's a big piece of it. And then as we get farther down the line, you'll learn more and more and more. So we aren't going to leave you hanging. You don't have to figure it out on your own, but it does take a little while. The other person I'd probably mention is this lady over here, Mrs. Nobis. She's the executive assistant to the superintendent, but also to the board. And she is the one who keeps all the information flowing and keeps the board coordinated and organized and runs the calendars. And you never cross Colleen on the calendar because you can get yourself in a hole in a hurry. So,
We could not do it without Colleen,
and so,
100%.
so you have support that's pretty high level.
I was going to comment. I about made that mistake on the calendar this morning, but I think I got it fixed, right? So my comment was about I don't have as much input and knowledge as Kristen does about time. There are, I mentioned, for example, those examples of less common, but for example, on a teacher termination hearing or an employee hearing for discipline, sometimes we have to call the board together pretty quickly. And maybe in the matter of a week or two, I'm asking the administration, hey, can you get a hold of the board because I have to convene the board for a 4-hour hearing on teacher discipline. Those are less predictable. I wish we could say we know when those are going to happen. I don't always know, and they're not that often, but yet the time commitment there is less within our control because we have to provide those under a certain timeline and have those accomplished.
There are some of those meetings that you do have to be able to change your schedule. I am self-employed, so it's pretty easy for me to do, but I know sometimes, depending on those of you who've been in other boards before, it isn't always easy, but I feel like our board, all 5 of us do a really good job of knowing that it's really important that we be there at the meetings that we need to be there for the special sessions or executive sessions. All 5 of us make it our top priority.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that from personal experience, I did go to a seminar prior when I was a board candidate, and like I said, I spent time with superintendent and the treasurer of the schools learning more about the district, and was able to ask a lot of questions. But my onboarding to the job was I got sworn in, I sat down in my seat, and there were a couple books for my library sitting in front of me. And so I say that because the work that the administration and board goes to here to help bring new board members into the work, That's so important, and I hope that all of you take advantage of that as your candidates.
I feel Greg and I both attended the new board member academy. I think spoke a little bit about that. The ISBA offerings are crucial to be a part of, especially that first year. A lot of them are offered virtually, most of them, correct? Almost all of them?
At least in a recorded
Yeah,
version of it,
yeah,
yeah.
either live or
Yeah.
recorded, and so it makes it pretty easy to learn. Many of the ones I've been to reiterate over and over again things like the open door law that Mr. Manna went through, but the more you hear it, that helps solidify what our roles are in that ethics portion of us being. So I know ISB as well as Dr. Beresford alluded to has a couple more of these types of sessions scheduled. So I guess potential school board candidates sessions that would be really good for you to attend or watch if you can.
Any other questions? Okay, going once, going twice. We'll be hanging around a little bit if you have something you want to talk about afterwards. But thank you for coming today, and appreciate your attendance and curiosity. And we look forward to communicating more with you. I think what you can tell as an overall theme is that we have to work together, and we have to work together. And the better we work together, the better it is for our students and the families that we serve. Um, in closing, I would just say we have about 16,200 students in Carmel Clay schools that represent, what's the math on that, 32,000 parents, and then there's grandparents, and then we have like some very large extended families. So thousands and thousands of people in our community that count on us to put a quality educational program out there. And really, it's pretty simple. We want all our kids to be known and loved in this district. We want them to be challenged appropriately so that they can be academically successful at the next level, whatever that is. And we have kids on every level of ability in this district. But we want every single kid to grow. That's the, no matter what they're, we have kids that are just flat out brilliant. We have kids that get perfect SATs and ACTs, not just a couple, but like 12. We get kids that are running businesses right now as juniors and seniors in high schools. We have brilliant, brilliant, brilliant kids. We also have students in our district that have more obstacles than any human being you can imagine can face in order just to learn and grow. But in our world, in this district, we want every kid to grow wherever they are and whatever obstacles they're facing. And we cannot do that unless we have a strong board that cares about every kid, unless we have a talented staff, most talented staff that we can get together. And in closing, I'll tell you that most people like do an org chart, and they say like, there's the board, and here's the superintendent, and here's the assistant superintendents, and then they get all the way down to the teacher and the student. But at Carmel Clay Schools, you have to flip that upside down, because the most important people in our district is a student and a teacher in a classroom, because that's where the magic happens. And then as you go down the rest of the level, at the very, very bottom is the superintendent and the board. And all the layers between us and that classroom are all there to support that classroom to make sure that's happening at the highest level possible for every kid we have in the district. And if you're willing to take on that challenge and want to be on that team, let's get it going. So we welcome you, and just remember that the sign up for candidacy starts today. It ends on June the 30th. That's a change. Excuse me, June 20th. I'm sorry. See, Colleen, don't want to mess with dates. But yeah, on the 20th, and then so that's different because it was a month later in the past. So that's different. So that date is really, those are two big important dates. And then I think that's it. So have a good day, and thank you so much for being here.